How are we all doing? I hope. Thank you. So, I hope you all are having a fantastic time at TC18. My name is James Chen, and I work as a product manager on the Hyper team at Tableau, working to continuously deliver new capabilities to you guys, our Tableau data rockstars. It's my pleasure today to introduce Neil Richards, one of our fabulous Zen masters. Neil comes from the UK and is an avid user of Tableau, especially Tableau Public. He's actually a Tableau Public ambassador since 2017 and shares his discoveries and tips on data vizzes. From big idea questions such as why do we choose to see our data, to guides on how to create unique vizzes in Tableau, Neil covers the whole spectrum. One of my favorite vizzes that Neil's published shows average US college tuition over the past years. Since I graduated from college last year, tuition is still very fresh in my mind, so I really love that data. I'm more excited to learn more about what Neil has to share on creating data art from a design-first perspective, so please, join me in welcoming Neil Richards.
Thanks, James, for that introduction. I literally can't see any of you, but thank you all for being here. I only know you're here because I saw you filling up before. But so anyway, I shall proceed on the basis that I assume that there are people there. So anyway, my name's Neil Richards, as James has said. My day job is actually, I'm a data visualization manager for Higher Education Statistics Agency in the UK, which means I look after all the student data and visualize some of that. And if I was talking to you as if that was my job, I would probably be talking to you about data-driven design, because that's the way you're supposed to do it. You're supposed to have your data and come up with the design. However, I'm here as Neil Richards, Tableau Public Ambassador and Zen Master, and I want to talk to you about design-driven data, which is really just about flipping that whole concept around so that you can be more creative with your visualizations and you can have a completely different way of thinking about things. So I hope you enjoy it. I'm going to show you a few visualizations and a few ideas. If you want to tweet about it, you can, oh, it works good. Right, you can use design-driven data, and it would be great to hear from you. So I'm going to start with this, which is a very well-known piece of art. Does anyone know who this is by? Mondrian, absolutely right. I'm British. That's the last audience participation I'm going to do, don't worry. And, you know, I love that bit of data art anyway, or that bit of art. It looks like it could be straight out of Tableau, a tree map or something like that. But what I actually found out was this is called Tableau #1. And that got me thinking. It's amazing what you can find by Googling just before your presentation, but it also got me thinking about what does Tableau mean? And I like to use this slide in some of my talks. The English word tableau, so you can see this comes from the online definition. We're talking about a picture, a scene, a picturesque grouping of people. And if we go further from the English definition and think, well, obviously, it's a French word, really, isn't it? The different definitions in French point towards it being a board, and it's a blank canvas. And I was actually really pleased to hear the dev from the devs on stage, Swati Shrivastava. She said, Tableau, it's like a blank canvas, and the data is your palette of colors. And that's exactly how I like to think about it. So Tableau is your blank canvas. So let's go on. I just want to point this comment out from my friend Kevin Flerledge. You may have seen him around, or you may have seen someone who looks very like him around. And he makes fun because he thinks the stuff that I do is really artistic. And I'm here talking about data art. And I'm sort of in a little bit of denial about that. So he said, hey, I'm going to do a hashtag not artistic t-shirt. But I've said Tableau can make you look artistic. The tool that Tableau is, it allows you, if you want to think about things creatively or things a little bit differently, to be really artistic and come up with some nice stuff. If anyone ever met my art teacher at school or met my wife and kids when I play Pictionary, you'll know I just cannot draw, I cannot design, I am not creative. I don't think I am, but I do think Tableau can make me look quite good. So you might get some ideas from this, how it can make you look good too. So a bit about me. I have a blog which I call Questions in Data Viz. Looks like my last few posts have been quite colourful ones. Really, I'd just like to sort of post about some of the stuff I've done, some of the principles behind it, some of the questions I might have had as I did it, so I can just sort of start a bit of a discussion. I like to frame things in questions, but very often I sort of like to start a debate, give a few ideas, perhaps see what people might want to think. There was a very obvious exception to this, which is one of my first posts a couple of years ago, when I said, should the data drive the visualization? And kind of awkwardly for this talk, I said, obviously the answer to this is yes, because it can't be the other way around. I think the next post I'm going to do is it okay to change your mind? Because I have changed my mind. All right, the data probably should drive the visualization, but I want to talk about flipping it around. And one of the biggest influences for me about flipping this around is from Giorgia Lupi. This is one of her slides that she likes to talk about in data humanism. She's very much one of my biggest influences and my heroes, and I'm delighted to say, is here at the Tableau conference. She was actually scheduled to be on at the same spot as me. I kicked up a bit of a fuss about that because I really wanted to see her. Well, I'm British. I sort of sent a sort of slightly annoyed Slack message to see if that would work. But it did, because I really think if you're interested in design-driven data and the kind of things that I like to talk about, you'd be interested in her talk tomorrow as well. But she talks about sort of flipping some ideas, so not only just flipping the idea of data-driven design to design-driven data, but also just sort of thinking very much more about the personal nature of each individual bit of data, that kind of thing. But it gave me validation. It made me think, oh, okay, design-driven data, that's a thing. I can use that. It's a concept that I really wanted to explore a little bit further. So this is Giorgia, and a little bit more about what she says in her TED talk. I very much want to sort of emphasize. She says, design serves the data. It's the design that you see first. In any visualization, you see the design of the visualization first, and that's what that's what's first going to go into your brain. And it's those choices which spark your interest. So intrigue leads to insight is a phrase I quite often like to use. Because I do think that if you've actually seen something that intrigues you, that's what's going to make you want to look further and want to see what the insight is. So similarly, she says, interesting designs are remembered more. And one of the things is, it's okay to start sketching the data right away. Maybe not necessarily until you've actually sort of seen the data to start with, but she will say as soon as you've done that first bit of exploration that Tableau is so good for, you can start to think about what you want your design to be. Now, this represents Dear Data, which is a project that Giorgia and her friend Stephanie Posavec, they undertook in 2016, I think. And it was for 52 weeks. What they did, in each week, they came up with a hand-drawn data visualization, which they invented on the spot, or they had the same theme for each of them, and they would talk about something personal. So it might be the clothes they wore, the emotions they felt, the interactions they had. One very popular one was the swear words they used, that kind of thing. And they would create a visualization. They would put the legend, the way of interpreting on one side, and they would put their visualization on the other side. And I actually love this, even though it's just sort of promotional for the project itself. I love the way it's a small multiple visualization, and you can really see the difference between the shiny US post boxes and the grotty London ones with moss growing off them. And the way they're even angled, you can even see one of them's left-handed, one of them's right-handed. You can just see so much from a sort of fun visualization like that. And then that same year, two Zen masters, you may have seen them already if you saw the tips session. I think it was in this room yesterday. Andy Kriebel and Jeff Schaefer, they undertook what they called Dear Data 2, which was more or less the same thing. So they undertook some of the same things themselves. And they decided they wanted to recreate it in Tableau. So here's an example of a postcard that one or other of them wrote, all to do with privacy. And then how they were able to recreate it in Tableau, so using just everything that comes out of the box. And they presented this a couple of years ago at an event in Birmingham in the UK, I think. And what Andy said really resonated with me. He basically said that Tableau, all it does is it takes your data and it draws dots. That's all it does. It puts your data in positions on the screen. And then when you program with Tableau, or when you use Tableau, you're just telling it how to join the dots, and you're just telling it what shapes you want to make with those dots in order to visualize it. Whether that's show me and dragging it to a bar chart and doing it instantly, or whether that's doing something a bit more specialist and contrived like a Sankey, that's fine. But Tableau allows you to basically draw what you want. And he said, if you can draw it, Tableau can draw it. Tableau can create it for you. So I guess that's the sort of background behind the kind of things that I like to think about when I think about what I consider as design-driven data. So I wanted to sort of go through some of my inspirations. And this is the first one. This is a project I started in the last 12 months or so ago. We've got 6, I'm pausing here, I was going to say we've got 6 well-known album covers. We've got some well-known album covers and some less well-known album covers here. You might recognize the Pink Floyd one up at the top. Some of the others are perhaps more obscure. But if I show you the bottom left one first, the Joy Division one, that's a very famous image for lots of reasons at the moment. You might see it quite a lot in pop culture. I think it's an old album from the 70s, but it's quite, you see it on T-shirts and things even now. And in the last year or two, this spawned, I should say, a whole new plot type. People started to do a joy plot with the idea that you have data and you can recreate it so it looks a little bit like this Joy Division album cover. So it's a bit like an area chart, but things overlap so that you have that 3D effect from front to back. So I started off thinking, well, wouldn't it be fun to try and do that in Tableau? And if I'm going to do it in Tableau, why not make it look a little bit like the original album cover? And I'll show you what I did on the next page. But I also then decided to do that for a number of other album covers. And you can see from here some of the data visualizations that I've created over the last year or so. So this bottom left one, the one that initially looked like Joy Division, I then changed to show Wimbledon men's singles games won over the years. The Pink Floyd one here I made into a simple one to illustrate the number of people marching at different World Pride events over the years. And I took a few more. I took each of these to represent different things. I always wanted there to be a meaning of the data. I didn't want to just recreate the album cover because I could just use Illustrator for that, or I could just sort of draw it in a different package. But it gave me the inspiration to use designs that someone else had created, a lot of them very iconic designs, and come up with something different, a data visualization that represents them. And I actually, I coined an album covers as data viz hashtag and project, if you like, because I was interested to see how many I could come up with. And I started to look at all sorts of other things. I started to look at wallpaper. These are 2 sort of wallpapers I've seen in places. Well, they're pretty horrible for wallpaper, but it still gave me inspiration. The one on the left is from a fine dining establishment near where I live in the UK. I don't know if you have them here. It's called McDonald's. Okay, but so yeah, I was looking around. The one on the right was I was at Nottingham University at a user group. And Simon Beaumont was giving a fascinating talk, and he thought I was taking a photo of him, but I actually turned the camera to the right to take a photo of the wallpaper. I thought, wow, wouldn't that look like a good data visualization? So I started to think of all these other things that it might be quite cool to use that design and then, as a basis of a visualization. So here's some more. These are actual sort of pieces of traditional art, if you like. The one on the left, I spotted in a gallery near me a few weeks ago. And at first I couldn't believe it. I'm a mathematician who can't draw, and now I'm hanging around in galleries for inspiration. That's what Tableau is doing to me. I looked at it, I thought, that just looks like one of my data visualizations. It's small multiple, it's red and blue, it's clear, it's crisp, I love it. And I contacted the artist and met for a cup of coffee, and I've got some really exciting ideas as to what to do. The one on the right, it was down in a hotel in Manchester. I looked at it and I thought, well, that looks a bit like a Neil Richards visualization as well, but surely I wouldn't want to do anything with that. So I created this about a week later. Uh, and this was from Makeover Monday, so I had the date in, and the timing was quite nice. I was able to recreate this. And I didn't deliberately just make it look exactly like the original thing that was on the hotel wall in Manchester. Everything here means something. Everything here is a country, it's a year, it's whether Irish whiskey sales were up or down, it's that kind of thing. Now, I've hidden it because I wanted this to be a particular work of art, but if you produce it, sorry, a work of data art, I'm not getting that pretentious, but if you want to create it, you always need to explain what everything means, but there's a data meaning behind that too. But then more things. I wonder if I could start to visualize film posters, or that was a bathroom tile in a shop that really looked like a sort of a nice tile map to me, no pun intended. And this one on the right, I really liked. I got something sent through the post to me. It was towards the end of May. I remember it quite well. And I thought, oh, this looks really good. Look at the different slopes. Every slope is slightly different. All the colors and the textures, they could mean something really interesting. I wonder what I could do with that. And I came up with all sorts of ideas. And then my wife told me I was looking at it the wrong way. And it was actually birthday wishes. It was a birthday card. And I thought, oh, crap, I'm a year older. But until I realized that, I started to look at just anything that seems interesting in color and texture and that might look like a traditional data visualization. And here was not one of my better ones, I don't think, but here was my attempt to have a bit of fun with the Hitchcock poster as well. So I went for a sort of spiral attempt at showing some, what was it? It was the different box office takings of the top 50 films. And other people who know me have started to do this. This is from Lindsay Betzendahl. And she's created this. She said, oh, I love album covers as data viz. Why don't I start doing clothing as data viz? So she created this, and this is a really sort of, we're flickering here. This is a really important topic about drug toxicity deaths in New Jersey, but she based it on a top that she'd just bought. And I thought it was fantastic that people are starting to take this on. And then people start to send me stuff. People start to say, this looks like a data visualization. Hotel carpets, hotel art there. So one from Josh, it looks so much like a data visualization there. But I don't just take inspiration from things. Some of it is just from other work. So a lot of what I like to do is take inspiration from other data visualizations that people have created. And not just necessarily within the sphere of Tableau either. This one here, this is by Gregor Aisch, who I think at the time was working for the New York Times. He now actually works for DataWrapper, visualization software in Germany. And what he was showing is, and I looked this up, this has got a name, I didn't know until I looked into it, and this is called a Lexus chart. And you've got the year that a particular event started along the bottom, and then going up on the y-axis, you've got the amount of time that the person has been in place. So by definition, they're all going to go up like a triangle, not like a triangle, but like an oblique line like that. And it's really interesting in showing the continuous length of service of, in this case, I think it was European leaders. And he wanted to show those that were currently in position in blue. And all the others were in grey. Sorry, I had to look then. I thought it said May Brian. I thought Brian May was suddenly our Prime Minister there. I was a bit worried, but it says May Britain. Okay. But anyway, I was really interested in recreating that because I'd never seen that done in Tableau. And it could be a real source of inspiration if you see something in another package that's created it, to see whether you might want to sort of explore whether you can do that. So this was what I attempted to do in Tableau. I went with something I knew, Premier League managers. I knew, much like European leaders, some are famous for having been in their jobs for a long time, some have particularly short turnovers down at the bottom there. So I was able to recreate that in Tableau in a similar way to show, for those of you who follow UK football, people like Ferguson and Wenger at the time. So one type of design-driven data and inspiration that I like to use is other people's work. And of course, it's very important that you that you attribute that. There's a new feature in Tableau Public now, which you may have seen in the Devs on Stage talk this morning, which makes it much easier to attribute and to give credit and kudos to work that you've, I nearly said copied, then it is copied. You know, if you've copied but made it your own and used as inspiration, then that's what you need to do. So the next section I've titled Design-Driven Data Challenges because, I mean, you might face a number of questions when you like to do things the way I do, people who might think that this isn't really the way that you should do it. And even I've said in my blog, this isn't really the way you should do it. So what if someone says data art? Well, that's not proper data visualization. My counter to that, if you like, is that if you have good data art, it does still visualize the data. You might be able to see something and you might not know as instantly as if you were looking at a bar chart what's going on there. So it may need explanation, but if you've got a great piece of creative data art, it's important that it does still visualize the data. So here's the one that I showed you earlier, where I decided to recreate this from a Primal Scream album in the 1990s. And as I'm sure would have been the first thought of all of you, I recreated a cricket match. But I mean, the reason I did it was I looked at it and what I wanted to do was identify, what can I use? Can I use measures? Can I use dimensions? How many different things can this be showing me? And just by looking at a design that you don't even know what the data is yet, that almost allows you to think of what that structure might be. So I looked around and I thought, well, this sort of scribbled sun, there's about maybe 11, maybe 12 spokes around the edge. If I call it 11, we've got the right number for a sports team. Right, now I'm thinking. So I can use the attribute of position, and I can that can determine which person in the team. I can use different lengths of the sun rays. I can use different widths. I can do something with the eyes in the middle. So suddenly I had all sorts of ideas as to what that could display if it was a data visualization. And so that's what I did on the bottom. And I realized I made a bit of a tactical error trying to talk about cricket here in the US. So I'll sort of go over this sort of quickly. But it's a bit like baseball, but all in white, and it takes 5 days. But essentially, this is just what I was talking about now. There are so many different attributes there that I could encode with data, and yet still look enough like the original to be inspired by it, and yet encode enough data just to show the data behind it. So we've got things like the runs and the speed of runs scored and that kind of thing. And the one on the right, you can always get extra context to a data visualization, especially if you're trying a new type, especially a weird one like this, if you try it with 2 different data sets, because you then get an additional story, which is what's the difference between the first one and the second one. And without going into too many cricket details, one was when England batted, one was when Australia batted. So you can see they're giving me different shapes of visualization in the same style. So there's so much that you can use, even if you've taken your design first and not decided what data to put in it. So you might think, or you might get the accusation that fancy chart types, they're hard. Well, yeah, they're going to be harder than dragging a drag and drop into a bar chart. But I'm sort of quite keen to contest that if they were really hard, I wouldn't be able to do them. I'd like to find sort of quick and easy ways of doing things, but there's very little that I do that might be sort of fancy table calculations or anything like that. So I like to find sort of shortcuts. Going back to this one, they don't have to be all that hard. And if you want to know how I created the thing on the right, it's actually just a whole load of lines. Because at first I thought, oh, well, how do I do circles? How can I lay one over the other? I got stuck, I couldn't do it. I thought, well, there's no way I can put the eyes on as well. I might be able to do it now because you can do transparent backgrounds, but you certainly couldn't then. Until I thought, well, if they're all just lines, I can just make them really, really thick, and then they fill into a circle. So it's actually easier than it looks. The downside might be that if they're all lines, it tends to look all sort of a bit jaggedy around the edges. In this case, that was perfect. So sometimes you get a little bit of luck the way that the design choices come out. This one here, so this is another example of a joy plot that I spoke about before. I wanted to visualize the medal winners from the Winter Olympics. And once I decided that a joy plot would look quite cool, I was lucky in the way that it came out, because the way it came out, it almost looked wintry, it looked icy, it looked like maybe these could be icebergs in a way, or clouds, and it didn't matter to me that we had one in front of another like that. It told so many different stories in the shapes. It told you the history as well as the geography, so we had things like East Germany there, which didn't come into existence in the early times, and then obviously it wasn't in existence after that either. West Germany is there, and there's a lot of new countries you can see in the last quarter or so, things like the former Yugoslav countries and smaller European countries, which have only just come into creation since the fall of the wall. So there's the history of different countries led to some really interesting shapes there. So I thought that a joy plot was the way to go, and I think that this one turned out quite nicely. And I'm not going to sort of show too much Tableau in this, and this is probably the only bit I am going to show you, but I just wanted to show you that I didn't know how to do a joy plot, but I sort of cheat, because I do it in 2 stages. So what I do is I do an area chart like that, and then once you put your dimension on the side, they're not going to overlap like a joy plot would. It's just going to give each individual country. So what I do is just do right-click and save as, and just save exactly the data that I want, and then start again. And I go into Excel. I wouldn't know how to do it any other way. I go into an Excel. I just have one line at the top that says 0 of each country, and one line at the bottom that says 0 of each country. And then, for each country, I've got my 0 there, I've got all the results that I exported, and 0 there, and I turn it into a polygon. And then I just decide how spaced out do I want to make these polygons. If I make them not too spaced out, then they're going to overlap each other. So if there's a clever way of doing it, there might be other people who could do it all in one go without sort of exporting the data into a different data set and starting again. For my purposes, though, I found a short, quick, not too difficult way, which I'm happy to stick to and share. And sometimes people will say, data art, well, you know, that's too hard to read. It is going to be harder to read. We're talking about the intrigue leading to insight. I want people to see something that's fun and interesting, and then make an effort to read it. But it can be made much easier to read. So if you bear that in mind, then you need to just help your reader to interpret what you've created. So here's some examples. This is one of the ones that I showed you, the psychedelic-looking one, looking at a recreation of an album, and the original album cover is down there. And what I decided to do was recreate it with Oscar winners, whether it was for a supporting role or a leading role, and each ring represented the decade of that person's age. Now, I knew that, and I put a legend down here which explains that. But the positioning is completely random. The positioning of all of these, I wanted it to look a little bit like the original, but there's no way you know who each of those actors or actresses is. Now, I know the big one at the bottom there is the legendary Meryl Streep. Everything is larger. She has had so many more nominations and wins than anyone else. But you wouldn't necessarily know who all the others are. And there's no way of doing that, and by keeping and also keeping the top image pristine. But we have a friend in Tableau. We have a friend which is Viz in Tooltips. Now, this doesn't help in a flat published version, but when this is on Tableau Online, the reader can then explore. They can hover. They can think, right, what's this particular splodge? Who's this referring to? And they can see this and say, oh, okay, that's Denzel Washington. Here is Denzel Washington. This is what each of the circles mean. That was for the particular films he was nominated for and the decade of his life. So it's a nice extra aid for us. If you want to put something that's a little bit more sort of artistic out there and hide the information, Viz in Tooltips is your friend. And here we go back to the Irish whiskey sales one. What I did in this particular case, it's not too clear here, but what I decided to do was put 2 different tabs there so that I hid all the way of interpreting and understanding the chart, because it needed a bit of that, on a tab at the back, and then all that information is there on the right. This is what all the colors mean. This is what each up and down indentation means. This is what the length of the width of each bar means. So those are a couple of tips and tricks at your disposal. Now, one thought might be that you can't reuse these creative chart types. You know, if you're creating something that's quite unique, especially if you've based it on an individual design that you've seen, what additional use can you get from that? But I found that creative chart types can inspire better charts. If you create something based on a design, there's nothing to stop someone else creating something based on your design or you improving it yourself. And there's been some great examples of that. This on the left is by one of my favorite data artists called Nicolas Rouget. He's produced this, and it's sort of discovering the elements. So from top to bottom, it's basically the periodic table from hydrogen going down to all the weird ones which weren't discovered when I was at school down at the bottom. And the way they loop is to determine the timeline of when they were discovered. So the larger the loop, the bigger the gap between atomic number of each element. So you can dive into that and you can understand it, or you can just hang it on your wall and it's a great piece of art. And I thought, I love that. I want to do something similar in Tableau. What I came up with was, it was a little bit different because instead of the chemical elements top to bottom, mine was more actually a more traditional timeline. But the rest, I've tried to recreate something fairly similar. So on the left, what I've got is a timeline of its winners of the Premier League, or the top football league in England. And I did the same thing on Spain on the right. And so you can see some similar loops the same way. There are short loops if a team sort of wins it in short succession. And there are long loops for teams like Aston Villa and some others who go many years without winning. So I was quite pleased with that. It wasn't a masterpiece, but I'd had a good bit of fun taking the influence of one of my favorite people and creating a new chart type in Tableau. And then a few weeks or months later, I was contacted by Michael Mixon, who creates some gorgeous stuff on Tableau Public, and you should definitely check out very much of the stuff that he's done. And he said, Neil, I'd really like to use what you did, because I've got an idea to make it look like wildfires in California. And we had a quick conversation as I explained how I'd created the curves. And then shortly afterwards came this amazing view on the top. Now, it's a much better metaphor. It's a much better use for the curves and the twists. It's telling a serious message. It's just not messing about with football data like I did. It's really showing each of these as a different wildfire metaphor, and it got a lot of praise, rightly, for a really good, powerful, well-designed visualization. And so he'd taken sort of my idea, which took the idea of someone else in the first place. So we've got a sort of chain of ideas going from, in this case, chemical elements to wildfires in California. And then Michael blogged about it, and he was good to attribute my original there. So the next suggestion might be that charts should be understood in 2 seconds. You've seen my PowerPoint wizardry, how I've liked to sort of move these words around and change to sort of refute each one. But I felt a bit strongly about this. All I could think of was, no, they shouldn't. I didn't want to whiz the words around. I don't think that's the case. I mean, I can contextualize it by, and this is what Seth Godin said relatively recently. And he said, I don't think that's what graphs are for. I think you're trying to make a point in 2 seconds for people who are too lazy to read the 40 words underneath. So that was his thought. And I think, I don't agree, but I do understand. And what I really like is this sort of quote from Elijah Meeks, who he did 2 or 3 different articles, which he entitled Data Visualization Fast and Slow. So he acknowledged that, Seth Godin has a point in certain circumstances, but he said the fast mode of data visualization is real and important, but we can't let it become our only mode of visualization, because then you stifle creation. You limit the possibilities not just for the creators, but for the readers as well. So that's an acknowledgement. We know the fast mode, if you like, the so-called the director who needs to see something in 30 seconds and understand that big-ass number. So there is a place for that, but it's important to think that is not the only place. I have another quote here. It's quite a wordy one, more academic quote from Priti Shah, saying that the spontaneous description of a typical line graph takes approximately half a minute, and that's comparable to time needed to comprehend a paragraph of moderate length, and basically a lot longer than it takes just to recognize something quickly, a face, a word, or an object. And in a way, I think it's quite sort of appropriate that this is such a paragraph. This is a wordy paragraph. You have to, I think you can agree with it, but you have to read it for a while and understand it and take it in. And that, to me, it really sort of exemplifies the fact that it's okay to have a visualization that takes longer to understand. Now, I like to use the design tricks or my design style to make sure that people see it in the first place. But once somebody does consume a graph, it really is important that you allow them to have that time. So here's an example. I love this visualization on the left from Yvette Kovacs. We've seen this a lot. I think it's down in the Tableau public gallery, and I've seen it on show in various places as well. It's certainly one of my favorite recent visualizations. And we both have the same data set here as part of the Viz for Social Good challenge, and I took that as an influence for what I wanted to do. I came up with something different, but Yvette's initial idea of looking at the 100 companies in our data set, coming up with a small multiple, a grid of 10 by 10, and showing things in a quadrant way like that, I loved that. So I took that and I twisted it round, but that was very much part of my inspiration. And then what I came up with was also sort of quite well received, but it needed a lot of explanation. It needed all this stuff here for me to say what all the different colors are. It needed an additional bar chart there, I think, to say what my takeaway message was. And my takeaway message was that only 2 companies in this particular 100 list are companies where if you are a non-white female, you are most likely to get promoted. All the other 98 favored white males mostly, all the various other groups there. So that was a powerful message that I wanted, but although I had a nice design, there wasn't all that easy to see, so I would sacrifice a little bit of instant analysis for a design that I wanted people to have a look and read. And I was able to, to run with this. Workout Wednesday, I think there was a session run today in the conference. It's been running for a while. I was invited to create something that the community might want to be able to see if they can figure out how to do themselves, and that's all part of the Workout Wednesday challenge, which, when you think about it, is the ultimate example of design-driven data. What they will do is they will come up with something that's potentially quite tricky, or that needs a little bit of thought to see if you can figure it out yourself, and then they invite you to recreate that particular example. So I thought, well, I know, I'll do that. I'll use Superstore data because everyone can get hold of that, and I'll put this recent visualization of mine up and see if people can recreate it. So this was, again, perhaps an example of mine then being altered and moved on into different contexts as design-driven data. Now, needless to say, lots of people managed to do it. Some managed to do it in much better ways. They used polygons. I sort of cheated with just the square mark because that was sort of all I could figure out how to do. So they did it in a similar but more effective way. Rosario, I don't know if she's here, not only managed to do it, but even managed to blog about it in both English and Spanish and put out an absolutely perfect solution in 24 hours. So it really sort of sparked creativity in the community that went further than what I was able to do originally. But again, that's a very good example of design-driven data. So I've said, well, it's all about fancy chart types. I've shown you various things which they're far from conventional, shall we say. But it doesn't have to be. It can be about the simplest of chart types. The next thing, which has been running for most of this year, is by the storytelling with data. This is a brand of Cole, Nussbaum, and Knaflic, who, if you don't have the storytelling with data book, you should really consider getting it. It's one of the sort of seminal data visualization aids, which really teaches you best visualization practice. You shouldn't be doing what I'm doing. If you're doing anything for business, you should be doing what's in her book. She can really teach you the best way to create a good, understandable, readable, crisp visualization. But as well as that book, she has a website and she's introduced a blog, and she started this challenge where she has invited people to create a visualization based on the type that she suggested. And you can see there, January, the challenge was an annotated line graph. So she put out the note that said, I'd like you all to put out an annotated line graph. I'll have a look, I'll comment on it, I'll tell you what I think. And after that, we had 88 annotated line graphs in a week. Now that's the ultimate design-driven data, because that was a challenge or request or an opportunity to try out a chart type, to use the best principles you can to decide how you wanted to do it, but without a data set assigned to it. So you eventually then had to go and find your own data and decide what you wanted to do. And you can see from this the wide variety of all really nice, well-formatted, presented, annotated line graphs. I did mine. Being me, I still wanted to pick something I thought probably no one else wanted to do, because I do like to kind of stand out. So I went for the rise and fall of the name Neil. But again, this was design-driven data. I had the challenge, I decided what I wanted, or it was decided for me, and I then wanted to try and make a chart as good as I can. So I don't think it always has to be about, seeing these patterns on the wall and turning that into a data visualization. Although if you start to think like me, you will start to do that kind of thing. But it can be the simplest kind of thing there. So in summary, I'll just run through some of these things, which are just some of the points that I've made. Really, anything can inspire. Nothing is off limits. If you fancy having a go at design-driven data, and if you've just got an idea in your head, if you've seen something that looks like it's quite cool, that it might work as data visualization, maybe the pulpit of, or the lectern of where you're presenting, anything like that, nothing is off limits. Give it a go. Intrigue leads to insight. I do strongly believe in that. If you see something that turns your head, so if you're on Twitter, you can see possibly the most insightful bar chart you're ever going to see. But if it's gone before you notice it, then you've not had the opportunity to get that particular insight. So intrigue really does help, and that's why I like to do things the way I do. We've seen some of the chains that can develop. I've said one design can inspire many. And I would say that some design-driven data is just not as hard as you think. It doesn't have to be. If you can get creative, or you can just have a go, or sort of Google how other people might have done it, then the chances are you've got a good inspiration to make a start. It allows you to learn new skills. You really can. You do get a lot more skills through doing it this way. If you've got a particular challenge you need to overcome, it might be that you have to Google, how on earth do I do this? And you find a level of detail calculation that you didn't understand before. But once you learn it, you can do it in a fun way, which you could then maybe take to work. I've done that before. Had an example of a calculation or something that I hadn't tried until I'd done a more personal and creative project. And then again, if the reader's drawn in, they will take the time to read and just have fun. This has been a fun project for me. In doing this fun project, in being creative and putting stuff up, I've had plenty of recognition from Tableau, and I get the chance to come here and talk to you guys. So, that's really not all bad, to be able to be creative, to have fun in my hobby, and also to improve at this particular bit of software as well. And finally, I didn't know I was going to embarrass Steve. I didn't know he was going to be here today, but he sent me this feedback when I was talking about album covers as data viz earlier in the year. And he said, look, thank you. I'm not going to go back to my work and start producing album covers, but it just has made me think, well, maybe I can think a little bit more creatively. So, and that's kind of what I'm after. It's made me think more creatively, and it probably makes me think more creatively when I'm back at work as well. If I just want to think, have I got an alternative to a bar chart or to a line chart or something like that? So I'm going to hold this open to questions, if anyone has any questions. But before I put it open to questions, I just want to say thank you all for being here. I do appreciate it, thank you. I say, there are 30 other cool talks out there you could have been at, so I'm honoured that you're here. But if you have any questions, then do let me know. I don't know if someone has a mic, because I can't even see. Or come and talk to me on the stage, that's cool. Oh, and one thing I'm supposed to tell you is, well, it's supposed to say thank you. Where's it gone? You know the bit about the survey. Fill it in. Give me 5 points. I've messed that up. But thank you.